Well, welcome everyone to another edition of Plantation Park Channel. Today we're going to talk about a relatively boring but sometimes confusing subject, and that's the budget, and specifically budgeting for COAs or condominium associations. So let's dive right into it. Budgeting, when you're talking about budgeting, you of course need to start out with income, and that's how much money you have coming in. Income is generated in COA in one of two ways. First is the monthly assessment. Those are COA fees that are paid every month by all of our owners. This is the main way that income does go into our budget. There's a less desirable form of income, and that's the special assessment. They're usually dreaded, and they're usually only done in emergencies. We try not to rely on special assessments at all, and we'll talk a little bit about those a little bit later. There is the other half of the equation from income, and that's expenditures. Basically anything that has to be spent on a daily, monthly, or yearly basis. Now, hopefully the majority of those expenditures are planned, but we all know that unplanned things do occur. So it is the hallmark of a strong budget to try to plan for the unplanned or come up with contingencies just in case while you're going through your budgeting plan. For budgeting within COAs, we do have a yearly budgeting process that occurs. It does usually start in August or September when the budget committee or the treasury group starts to come up with how we're going to be making our plans for the following years. Usually does get ratified in October, sometimes November. Now, the operations part of that budget is by far the largest amount, so we'll talk about the operations budget first. The operations budget is the mostly recurring day-to-day expenses that go into running an operation like Plantation Park. The other part of the budget, however, is the reserve budget. Those are the not recurring, not routine expenses, but mostly long-term expenses and bigger projects. Now, this is also the upkeep of our buildings, the replacement of items that are damaged or do have regular life expectancies. If you were to be comparing this to a corporation or a big business, the reserve budget is kind of analogous or similar to what would be thought of as a capital items budget. So, the operations budget, it's a blueprint. It's actually a guideline that allows the manager of the complex and the president to work as a team in order to make sure that the operation runs smoothly on a day-to-day basis without having to constantly go to the board for approval on every item. So it is a guideline that's out there to really help manage the organization. It's a very important tool. This budget is approved yearly by the board of directors, so it's a pre-approved set of expenditures that we try to go by. And there are approximately 5 categories or 5 main categories that are in that budget, and that budget consists of over 80 line items at the last count when we start looking at our budget. But to make it short, sweet, and simple, those 5 categories are buildings, recreation, grounds, common areas, and administration. When you look at the 2 largest outlays, those would be administration and buildings. Those account for over 80% of our overall operations on a day-to-day basis, and that's exactly as you'd expect. Keeping the buildings in good order, making sure that the operation runs smoothly, those are both squarely in the middle of those 2 categories. Also includes all of your salaries for the administrative assistants, the administrator, our manager, our salaries for our maintenance folks, all the equipment and material. Those are all going to be, for the most part, in those 2 categories. Third biggest expenditures, grounds. That would be our horticulture, our lawn maintenance, some of the pest control that goes on outside, as well as some of the other equipment and outlay that has to go towards keeping our grounds up. Small percentage, the common areas at 4%. That's going to be maintenance of the clubhouse, the pool, all of those common areas. A very, very small degree. Some of our garages might fall in this category. And then our smallest category doesn't even come in. It comes in at under 1% is recreation. Those would be miscellaneous categories to deal with recreation. Let's say 0%, but that's only because it does round down since it's less than 1% of our current budget. The other part of our budget, which is a little bit more complicated, deals with the long-term maintenance, replacement, and capital purchases, or the reserves budget. How we plan that budget is a little bit more involved. We create that in consultation with the reserve studies. The board makes and commissions those studies on a regular basis, ideally every 2 years, which is what is recommended, so that we can try to keep up with those unplanned things or perhaps get an outside company's opinion on how often things should be replaced or refurbished or enhanced. So this actual part of the budget is a guideline, not an estimate. There's no requirement to do this. Most reputable organizations that want to plan for the future will commission and will fully fund these reserve studies that are out there. But in terms of where these are, they're all guidelines. They're recommendations, not requirements. And this is why the board typically will go forward and ratify or reinforce whether or not we want to use reserve studies in each particular case, so that we can make sure that the reserves budget is being held true. When it's done properly, having this reserve budget minimizes the need for special assessments, and we definitely went through this in recent times. Just last year, you might recall a hurricane that came through and did cause in excess of $50,000 of damage to our property. We didn't even come close to hitting our required minimum to hit our insurance carrier, because they're very, very high when it comes to hurricanes. However, as you all know, there was no special assessment to repair the community, and that's because we did have a healthy reserves budget that was there to take care of the items that needed to be taken care of here. So was no impact to our owners last year because of this. Now, the last point that I wanted to make, and that is if you fund this account fully, and you can also mandate transfers from your operations account. If your operations account is not using all of the funds that it's needed, you can move funds in that direction. We have done that as a board, and what we've been able to do is fund our reserve account slightly over where the recommended point is. Our recommended point right now is $1.603 million. We're actually at $1.781 million. So our reserves are healthily and funded, and we are anticipating us to be able to continue having a fully funded and healthy reserve budget. When you look at the budget altogether, though, this is both reserves and operations over the years. Back in 2014, when we started this graph, our budget was approaching $1.2 million. That's a combination of both reserves and operations. And then over the years, as you see, we've been able to, as a board, reduce our overall expenditures to where we're just over $1 million starting in 2016. The important thing to note, though, is this green section at the bottom. That is the reserve contribution. That stays the same. Putting everything into perspective, when you look at the graphs that are popping up now, we started back in 2014, a 17% reserve contribution. Looking through the years, that contribution appears to have gone up. It has not gone up. We've actually maintained the actual same or relatively similar contribution to our reserves account. What has gone down is our operations budget, or the money that we spend on a daily basis, to the point now where in 2018, the reserves contribution is 20%, and the operations budget is 80% contribution from the COA fees that you guys all pay on a regular basis. Well, I hope that this presentation has answered many of the questions that many of you might have about the puzzle that putting a budget together can be. This is by no means meant to cover everything, but we wanted to try to give you guys a short idea of what's going on when we put these together, since this is budget season. As always, if anybody has questions about the budget or anything else going on with Plantation Park COA or the board, please come see us or come contact us through our webpage. We'll be more than willing to answer those questions for you. As always, we hope you all are having a safe and successful 2018, and we look forward to interacting with all of you in the coming year.